Welcome to Synagogues of England, Part 11. In this episode, we check out various Jewish houses of worship in the city of Manchester. There are more than 500,000 people living in this area of northwest England, and several Jewish houses of worship that we will require at least 2 or 3 episodes. In this episode, unless we say otherwise, the synagogue will be of the Orthodox practice. We're looking at Adath Yeshurun Synagogue that also at one time was known as Adath Israel or Agudas Yisrael Synagogue until 1948. It was known as Adath Yisrael for a couple years in the 1950s, but it should not be confused with another congregation currently known as Adath Yisrael. This congregation began in the late 1930s and moved to the location shown here either in the late 1950s or early 1960s. In recent years, the spiritual leader was Rabbi Cohn, but we're not sure if he's still the leader of this congregation. The Hebrew letters on the building seem to indicate that there is also an adult education yeshiva located there. There's another congregation called Adath Israel Synagogue. It was previously known until 1935 as Kahal Hasidim Synagogue. It too is located since the late 1950s in the Broughton Park area of Salford, an area of Manchester, but we are not able to find the building. Manchester itself is located in the greater Manchester County, and Salford is one of the cities within it. Regardless of whether it was called Kahal Hasidim or now Adath Israel, this synagogue was formed in 1905. There's another congregation that we cannot find the building. It was called the Central and North Manchester Synagogue. It started in 1978, but it closed in 2008. The congregation was the result of a merger between the North Manchester Synagogue, also known as the Broider Shul, and the Central Synagogue. The Broider Shul began in 1891. Without trying to confuse anyone, when the Central and North Manchester Synagogue closed in 2008, it merged with the Manchester Great and New Synagogue and was thereafter renamed the Manchester Great New and Central Synagogue. At the time that it closed in 2008, it had a little more than 100 members. And here's a third synagogue building that we are unable to show. And that's because the congregation does not have a facility, but rather meets in members' homes. It's called the Chaim V'Tikva Independent Congregation, which in English means life and hope, and it is of the Reform practice. The congregation was established in 1988 as a breakaway from another existing congregation called Sharei Shalom North Manchester Reformed Congregation. The disagreement had to do with rabbinical style. We can finally show a synagogue that has a facility available. This is an overhead shot of the Cheatham Hebrew congregation. It meets in the Jewish Cultural Center. That's what is the building you're looking at. It's located there in the early 2000s. The congregation was established in 1958 with the merger of a couple other synagogues. There had been the Chevra Tillim Synagogue, also at one time known as the Chaye Adam and Chevra Tillim Synagogue, which had been formed in 1938 on the merger of the Chaye Adam Synagogue and Chevra Tehillim, and the 2 other synagogues that merged with it was the Rydal Mount Synagogue and the Sellel and Psalms Synagogue. Our next location is the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation, currently operated by a Lubavitch rabbi. The congregation was established in 1935 and at least 10 years ago had anywhere between 500 to 750 members. Its longtime rabbi of 35 years of service retired at the age of 86 in 2008. We're not sure when they took over the building, but this building was constructed in 1967. We believe that the current rabbi is Daniel Walker. Since the turn of the most recent century, there have been security lapses and issues in the area, and an actual murder was captured on the security video camera in 2008. When a man was stabbed outside a kosher bakery nearby the synagogue building. The police ruled it not an anti-Semitic or racial incident, but an act done by a deranged man. The design of the synagogue building pays homage to a building constructed in 1934 for the Holy Law Synagogue. Here is the Higher Krumsal Synagogue. It stopped serving the purpose as a house of worship in 2017. It was built around 1928 or 29. The area has become very black hat, and the building was purchased by a yeshiva. The full name of the congregation was Higher Krumsal and Higher Broughton Hebrew Congregation. It was the result of a merger in the late 1960s of two synagogues, the Higher Broughton Synagogue and the Higher Krumsal Hebrew Congregation. The Higher Broughton congregation had begun in 1908, whereas the Higher Krumsal in 1922. Here is a look at the interior of the main sanctuary. Here is the location of the Higher Prestwich Hebrew Congregation, which was founded in the 1950s. No mergers involved here and no other information. Our final stop on this tour takes us to the Hillock Hebrew Congregation, which is in Whitefield part of Greater Manchester. This congregation has been located here since 1973. The synagogue was established 3 years earlier, and in that interim period, congregants met either in individual homes or at St. Michael's Church Hall, which was kind of interesting because this was an Orthodox congregation and usually they would not hold services, even on a rental basis, in a church facility of another religion. But there is precedent set in the United States of Orthodox congregations allowed to rent space in a church social hall if it was in a separate facility from either the chapel or sanctuary. There are several more Jewish houses of worship to check out in the Greater Manchester area. So, bye for now and see you real soon.